Alright, so this is a redo of philosophy number 3, so I'll probably just name it philosophy number 4 and just make philosophy number 3 the unreleased one, or at least the one that remains uh, private on the channel. Um, so, if you're wondering why it's higher quality, like, well, okay, it's actually lower quality. Usually those videos, I've figured out how to get those videos 1080p because my phone camera is amazing. But because I changed the values of this channel. Formerly, I would think that it was important to do them all on my phone, and it's and that I did it every week. But the fact that I stopped with the vlogs every week, I just released the super vlog, means that uh, some of the videos can be higher quality like this. That said, my laptop, which I'm doing this on, has a much worse battery than my phone does, but the trade-off is it doesn't shake as much. So yeah, I'm hoping to get at least the philosophies higher quality like this, if I can help it. Although I have to find a pretty solid spot to sit, which there are some, but like it just so happens that there's this little concrete thing right on this river. This little, it's not a bridge, it's actually a dam, but like if I were to sit on that bridge right there, there's people biking by and walking by all the time. So I would be disturbing them totally, especially considering I'm not, you can't see it, but I'm spread out here. I've got my stuff all over the place, including my notes for this upcoming philosophy. All right, so philosophy 4. I just thought I'd explain them and why this is 4 instead of 3. Oh, yeah, I didn't actually say that. Why? Philosophy 3, I talked about Descartes and I talked about a moral question. I'll be talking about the same things, but right after that, and before I could even really finish editing it, I got a whole new update to my information. I researched Descartes a lot more, and a little bit of Hume as well, who I'd known the name of, and that's it. I changed my opinion on the whole thing. The conclusion I came to was different, and it was a little more rambling. I'm not going to apologize for rambling. That's apparently what I did. But I think I can come to this from a slightly more knowledgeable perspective. So it's going to end up being a different video, and I don't even... Philosophy 3 was a finished product, so there's no point. I hadn't uploaded it at that point. I might still actually just upload it. I might not, but I might upload this as... I might upload 3 at the same time and keep it private just for continuity's sake, but I think that's... I'm 90% sure I'm using the word continuity correctly. Oh, yeah, and so I also, in Philosophy 3, which you wouldn't have seen, and won't probably, I talked about the new word I created, which is stepple. Another time I can talk about why I think new words shouldn't be decided by the dictionary. Anyways, stepple is a couple of steps. There might be another word for that, but so a stepple up is a couple of steps up, and a stepple down is a couple of steps down. I said it just by stumbling over a couple of words and creating stepple when I was trying to say a couple of steps in Philosophy 3. So the question, so this is, I guess I'll call this one Philosophy 4, Descartes and moral questionings. The question here is, it actually came up in a webcomic that I saw a while ago, but I'd be hard pressed to find the comic again. But the comic only kind of touched on it. The question is it better to exist in suffering or not exist? I remember, I guess I'll explain the webcomic a tiny bit here. In the webcomic, someone was talking to a vegetarian, someone who just made a meal, talking to a vegetarian. I think it was like a woman and her kid, or maybe a guy and his kid. Either way, and the kid's like, I can't eat this, it's meat. I've decided I'm a vegetarian. And I can't support the unjust treatment of animals, something like that. So, the result that, well, they have this discussion, and the result that the parent, I'm going to assume the parent, maybe the wife or maybe the husband or whatever, the meal cooker, anyways, says is, uh, it says, this animal which I cooked, of course in a more comical, more direct fashion, but they say, this animal which I cooked is just, as a species, riddled with genetic illnesses and uh, mal. Well, they're either way. They would not survive in nature. The only reason they exist is because we keep them from eating. Um, so, uh, if so, at some point I should bring up the kid said that classical vegetarian line, "Meat is murder." Anyways, the food collector says, so because of this, because they would not exist in nature, if if meat is murder, then vegetarianism is genocide, because if we did not eat these creatures, they would not exist. And that struck a point to me. So I originally started thinking about this topic, although not with such a directly posed question, when I found out about pugs. You can research them sometime. The whole mess of dog breeds is just weird. But pugs, as a short summary, more or less, a lot of the dog breeds, or I say we, but nobility, basically created for various purposes. Sometimes you get dogs which exist for very distinct purposes, like those really big, hefty dogs which exist to bring people supplies who got trapped in the Swiss Alps, or or just the Alps in general, maybe. But but then sometimes you get things like the poodle, or like terrier. Well, terriers kind of exist for something. They exist to keep rats out of stables. But you get these dogs which don't really exist for a purpose as much as because these people would breed them just to find out what happens, and maybe they'd pick something like wolves, who I'm breeding these from, have snouts. I wonder if I can get rid of the snouts by just breeding all the ones with short snouts until I get a non-existent snout. You can, but it creates a whole bunch of breathing problems. Anyways, the pug is basically the ultimate version of this. There's also, I think it's the English bulldog. I can't remember. It's the one with all the flaps of skin. How that's not actually natural to them, and it just overheats them. But the pug is the ultimate example of this. They're riddled with genetic illnesses. In fact, apparently they did a study of as many pugs as they could, or something like that, at some point. Either way, I heard the statistic that all pugs in the world are effectively related to 52 individuals. Which, I mean, to be fair, I've also heard the thing from a much more reputable source that all humans originate to sort of the Adam and Eves of the world, the 200 individuals from Africa, during a particularly bad time for the Homo sapiens. But these 50, anyway, what it comes down to is pugs. In this case, you think about all the problems with pugs, even like with those who own pugs, basically pampering them. They would not exist on their own. Now, there's some animals, herd animals like goats and pigs, which could just do fine. At least in certain situations, they would be completely fine on their own. But on the other hand, there are things like I mentioned, like I forgot what animal they were cooking. It might have been cows, but I don't know if cows are okay in nature. I suppose they must have came from something, but I do remember hearing that the actual wild cow was a much different thing. We've manipulated it as much as we've manipulated corn. Google that sometime. So the question comes up: is it better to exist in constant suffering? Should we, setting aside the ethics of eating meat itself and how we treat these animals, should we bring up the question of whether or not they should exist? One thing I brought up in 3 that I thought was a good point, although I rambled on it too much and I sort of used it as my main point, for reference, my answer to number 3, to philosophy number 3, was yes, we should keep them alive. But my reasoning for that was that sort of, I guess I could call it the white noise effect. Sort of, if you hear, for instance, a tone, you wake up, there's a, just, we'll say it's just like, I know, an old microwave I used to have, when it would get finished, it would make a beeping sound. Not like beep, 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 but just beep, like that. If you hear one tonal sound and it stays constant, it'll numb into the distance. It's the same for almost anything. In fact, it doesn't matter how complicated it is, at least as far as I can tell, as long as it's constant enough, it will numb into the background. Like, I remember one time when I was at a horse stable, and I actually, when I first got there, I was all worried that I would step in horse poop, or horse dung, I guess. And in the end, I did. But that's because I'd been there so long that the fact that there was horse poop all around me had numbed into, or had faded into, just the scenery of the thing. It's sort of similar to when I'm biking around, how I can just internalize everything, basically, unless something really strange happens and it takes me out of whatever I'm thinking about. So I think it's probably almost certainly the same thing with suffering. On the one hand, your body does have a certain amount of numbing reflexes, but and it like stops, and if it's obvious you can't do anything about it, it'll stop telling you this hurts, this hurts. But I think if something is constant enough, like if from birth you know nothing but suffering, then I'm wondering if that would just become your normal point, if you would still think of that as suffering. Sort of like how you could wonder if a fish knows it's wet. Of course, that's an old example, but you can think about if a fish is always in water, do you think it notices the existence of water, even if it has clear examples of something else? Even in the video, you can clearly tell the difference between water and air. And we are aware that we are in air, although to be fair, it took us, we've been around 200,000 years or so. It took us 199,000 years to figure that out. Well, I guess it took us like 11,000 years of agricultural society, which was the only one in which we do things like invest in science. So, but still, it took us 11,000 years in which we could have realized that there isn't just nothing and then something. Air and water, but there's something everywhere, except space, maybe. I'm not a scientist, I don't know. But what it comes down to is, my argument for 3 came down to, if they are always suffering and always have been, then that's normal to them. Sort of like the fish example. If you've been swimming constantly, I don't know if the wet is normal, so you're used to that. So not being wet is the strange thing. I think this is called born acclimatization or something like that. There's a word for it. I actually learned it recently. But the process where if someone's, for instance, born at a high altitude, they can much more quickly adjust to that high altitude. So if you're born in, we'll say, Denver, and then you move down to California, it'll take you several weeks to get used to that lower altitude. But then if you move back to Denver for a little while, you'll readjust in like a week. But that's in reverse for someone, for instance, born in California who moves to Denver. It takes them several weeks to get used to that altitude. Then they move back to California for a little while, and it takes them a week to readjust. So I think that's similar here. If they're used to constant pain, my wondering is, or is similar to if they're used to constant altitude, my wondering is if it's felt. Now, I've gotten this a little more complicated. How far can you see on this thing? Yeah, you should be able to see it. If you look down towards the end of there's a family of ducklings. It's really vague in there, but they're there. They're coming closer, so you might see them. There's like 30, and they're adorable. But so what this comes down to is, in 3, I decided that no, that they should exist, and we should continue eating them because that is how they exist. They exist for us to eat them, so they should continue to exist. In this one, I think it's going to get a little more complicated. I don't know if I've changed my answer, but I think I've changed my reasoning, and I'm less certain. And of course, well, I guess, how long is this? 15 minutes? Hey, you know what? Maybe I should make this yeah. So I guess I'll make this 4, and then I'll make 5 the Descartes stuff. Okay. So in the next one, I'll go over the Descartes stuff. In the next one, I mean like 5 minutes from now. But well, for me, yeah, I'll probably just upload them together. But I'll touch on that argument. What it comes down to is, since then, I have started to question whether or not, how do I put this? Well, I've questioned existence, but I've kind of stopped questioning my own existence. Well, I'll talk about that next time. But the question comes up, if they are, oh, here, stock footage check. Fingers and foot, yay. Okay, although this would be a really strange location to film stock footage. Could work. So, the question comes up that I hadn't considered before, which is whether or not existence is its own reason. And I'm not so sure. Well, I think okay, from this point on, I should preface that my ramblings are going to go from ramblings of a ethical question. What is it, metaphysics? No, metaphysics is why should there be ethics? So this is just straight philosophy. So my question here becomes, that's metaphysics, I think. Is existence its own purpose? Now, on the one hand, we could question, I forgot who said this, or who's thinking about this, I'm sure a lot of people, but on the one hand, we could think of it in the natural sense. If you want to think of this in the theological sense, the answer is yes, but, or at least generally yes. God created this, God created that. So I'm not dissing theologians here. I'll talk about that with Descartes. Anyways, but I'm thinking about it purely in a what can we reason out from our own existence, not pulling things out of believed truths, but only things which we can prove to ourselves. I guess is the best way to say that. So the question comes up. Well, yeah, I guess that's the best way to say it. Or not the question, the statement comes up that if we look at it from the natural sense, the only reason to exist is to reproduce and to continue one's own existence for whatever reason, but that's another video. But for reference, when you're hearing the banging of people biking over that bridge, I don't know if it's picking it up from this far away, but it might. So I don't want to look at it from the natural sense. I might come to terms with the natural sense of order at some point, but I'm not even scratching the surface of understanding why nature persists and exists for its own reason, except that it does. So I guess the next perspective we can take it from is, from the natural perspective, There's a whole bunch of bees around. Let me pause this for a second. All right, well, we seem to be good. Sorry about that. There's been a lot of pauses in this video. Not many, like 3 or 4, but well, maybe more. I don't know. Haven't been keeping track, but the one downside to this little peaceful area is that the bees, who are just now kind of waking up, I think, are really curious about the world which they have come to live in. Especially since not many people come here, so they see a human. I think I am. What's the term? Animizing them. Anyway, I am viewing them as more intelligent and questioning than they are. I think it's really just that they're looking for pollen in me. Luckily, I'm not made of pollen. Yeah, so I don't want to look at it from the natural perspective, because the natural perspective would just, I think, say existence for its own reason is enough, without giving any reasoning for that conclusion. But if we wanted to do it as we are, and analyze whether or not just existing, but continuing to actively be active, I guess. Continuing to actively be active. Not active in the health sense, but active in the perhaps doing of things which are not directly meant for reproduction. Reproduction and continuation of species and individual genetic heritage, I suppose. So, yeah, I don't even want to go into how nature develops seemingly universally in every single different little species for apparently the same reason. Oh, mic fell. Here we are. Should be able to hear me again. So, anyways, not going to touch that as much as I want to. I don't think I can add anything reasonable to that yet. So, I don't know what perspective to view this from, whether or not existence is its own reason. I think I'm still somewhat comfortable with my conclusion from Philosophy 3 saying that they probably don't experience the suffering. But then, even if we choose to believe that they are not actively suffering, at least not in the way that we imagine it, which is hard, distinct problems against the norm. So, like freezing to death. The idea about freezing to death is that you're not always that cold, I guess. So even if fish are in a constant state of drowning, we don't imagine that drowning as suffering. We imagine that as common course, I guess. So I don't know what perspective to view this from. On the one hand, I think from the natural perspective, I want to say that existence is its reason, and as long as their suffering is not at least actively experienced by them, then it's okay. On the other hand, I can't directly explain why I would say, yes, they should exist. We should continue to eat this meat so that they can continue to exist, without simply saying that they should exist because existing is better than not existing. So that gets into problems. You know what? I'll go a little into the religious. From the basic theological perspective, so I'll go here from the perspective of a theist rather than a pure, not assuming anything philosopher. Would be one to say, I like the theistic perspective because it gives reason to the naturalist perspective. And the result of that is that instead of it simply being exist and continue to exist in order simply to do so, an endless cycle of existing for the sake of existing, instead it says exist because there is a purpose in existing, simply though that it is one which you cannot comprehend, or at least that there is a correct order to things which is as it should be, if you want to view it as in a more Hindu perspective. Not so much duty, at least not in the Western Cicero perspective of it, but more, the classical stories of the warrior who doesn't want to fight, but does because his existence is that of a warrior. So we can then question it from a more maybe more, or no, I'll say less metaphysical. From the theistic perspective, we can sort of set the metaphysics aside and say that the existence of this thing is correct because existence itself results in something positive. All right, I'll admit, I'll explain this in the Descartes thing a little more, but I myself am personally a theist. We'll go with that. I'm not exactly a. I was effectively raised as Gnostic, so I don't want to go in and say like, oh, I'm a hardcore. I don't know what's a weird religion. They're not weird. All of them are completely normal. I like sacrifice goats to our almighty Lord Cthulhu, but I'm not. I'm not someone who goes in fully for any particular religion, but theology in general I can get behind. So I think I'm willing to end it at this perspective. This perspective and say existence itself results in either something which is positive or something which is as it should be. So existence, if it's not exactly its own reason, it's its own purpose. Existence is the purpose of existence, I guess I could say. And now it's not the purpose of the existing thing necessarily, but existence is the purpose of existence. So then, the suffering animal, which exists only for meat, should then continue to exist. And of course, the way we support this is by not becoming vegetarians. Uh, I suppose there's that long, rambling discussion, or one-sided discussion. 27 minutes. That's nice, and I'm doing it all on the computer, so you can see things pretty stably. That's the environment we're in, just for an ending thing. All right, I suppose enjoy the turkeys.